because I'll tell you what's super about this man is not the size of the man, but the size of his heart for you. So let's welcome right now Abdu Murray, and let's begin to start learning tonight.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening, and that was a wonderful introduction. I kept on using the word brilliant, and I was wondering to myself, am I in the right place? I don't know what he was talking about. Certainly Robbie, I'm not sure that qualifies to describe me. And then he's talking about the concert for the mind, and I qualify, I suppose, as the opening act that no one knows about, which is sort of obvious from the way in which the applause when Robbie was introduced. Everyone knew who he was, and I said, Abdu Murray, and someone said, I think I know who that is. It's a joy to be with you tonight. We're talking about a very, very, I think, important topic, and while the energy is high and the atmosphere is a little on the lighter side, it's going to get heady. And I think it's important for us to do that, and to be honest with the things that we need to address, culturally speaking, and in our own hearts as well. Because we're talking about truth and what's happened to it. What's happened to it in our society now. And it's sort of what I see now going on with the subject of truth and the idea of what can we be firm about? What can we know? What can we share? Do we even care about this concept anymore? What I'm thinking about now is the instability we see in every facet of our lives, whether it's in our personal lives, our political issues, our social issues, science, whatever you think about, there's a wobbliness to everything nowadays. Some years ago, I was traveling for a speaking engagement, and when I travel internationally, I usually fly, but because I live in the Detroit, Michigan area, which is vastly different than Honolulu. When we left, by the way, yesterday morning, it was 20 degrees and snowing. So this was a welcome difference. My wife and kids who were here today couldn't have been more excited about the different changes in weather, because I'm looking for their jackets, so I'm like, it's not going to be cold outside, guys. But this particular speaking engagement I was going to, I was traveling to, international. Because I'm from the Detroit area, I was driving into Canada, because we would border Canada. And this particular spot in Canada was a place called Wallaceburg. And in order to get there, I normally go over bridges, or I go under tunnels across the Great Lakes to get there. But this specific spot was just a car ferry away. It was like this little boat that takes a car over the river. Now, being from the Great Lakes state, and of course being surrounded by water here, when I say the words car ferry, you think of this enormous ship that can take 30, 40 cars. That's what I always think of, being from where I'm from. But this was not one of those ferries. This was this little tiny boat. The white paint was peeling off of it. It fit 2 cars maximum. And I thought, when this guy takes me across the river, it's going to be like Lord of the Rings style, you know, with like a rope kind of thing. So I got into the car ferry, and he said, stay in your car, don't get out, because it's going to be a short trip. So I obliged. Now, I'm terrible with directions. I am horrible with directions. My family's here, they can attest to this. I can get lost in my own home. So I'm obsessed with the GPS, constantly looking at my GPS, making sure I'm going in the right direction. So I sat in the car, and I looked down at my GPS to make sure we were going in the right direction. That's the exact moment when the boat left the dock. So I didn't see us leave the dock. Because I was in the car, the mass of the car and the suspension of the car absorbed the movement, the energy from the movement. So I didn't feel us leave the dock. I couldn't see it, and I couldn't feel it. So when I looked up, I had that nauseating vertigo you have when you're not quite sure if you're moving. You know, you're sitting at a intersection, and there's a car next to you, or a bus, and it begins to go forward, and you're not quite sure for a split second if you're going backward or it's going forward. And in that moment, what you do is you look for something that's stationary, whether it's a mailbox, or it's a street light, or it's a building, or the street itself, to get your bearings. And that's when all the confusion goes away. That's when suddenly you get a bearing as to what reality actually is, and all the confusion and nausea goes away. Well, the problem with this particular incident was I was on a river. Everything is always moving. There was no points of reference for me to look at least not immediately so. If I was on the boat and the boat was moving, then the boat couldn't provide the reference. The river is in constant flux, so the river could provide no context for me to get my bearings. It's when I began to look at the distant shore and see it getting bigger and bigger in my field of view, that's when all the nausea and the sudden panic went away. That's when it happened. When you think about what's going on in our world today, the things that we once thought were actually foundational, they don't change. Answers we once took as Whether it's sacrosanct or established, now everything's moving. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be this or be that or be married? When does life begin? When does life end? Does science have all the answers? All these various things. We're no longer moored to anything. We're in a river. And it's causing plenty of consternation. It's causing what I call the culture of confusion. It's a culture where confusion is considered a virtue and clarity is considered a sin. I mean, if you're confused about things, the reason why that's considered a virtue is because it breeds this word we use all the time, tolerance, where you can do whatever you want, and it's okay, man, it's cool. It's cool, brah, whatever you guys say here. Don't worry about it. And the reason why confusion is a virtue is because if the lines are fuzzy, then we have no boundaries we have to obey. There are no boxes we have to fit ourselves into. So I can do whatever I want, and you can do whatever you want. And that seems like a paradise. Paradise of freedom, but it's leading to a sense of chaos and uncertainty. And you look at the anxiety levels of children today, and you begin to see that children between the ages of 8 and 15 have a higher level of anxiety than they've ever had before. It's because we're telling them you can determine what you are, who you are, what your life should be about, all of this stuff at age 8. And we will do everything we can possibly do to make sure that your decision now sticks forever. There are plenty of us in this room who are only now just figuring out who we are. We're going to tell an 8-year-old you can figure out who you are and not expect anxiety levels to increase. The confusion is just blossoming. And it seems like it's going to get us somewhere, but it really gets us nowhere. When I was a child in the 80s, there was this thing called Cold War neurosis, where children were waking up in the middle of the night screaming because they had these nightmares that the USSR and the USA had finally made the Cold War nuclear hot. And there was all this confusion happening and all this anxiety. And there was a song by the band Genesis. Maybe you remember this song. It was remade recently, I believe, called Land of Confusion. The lyrics were so important. It said, "Oh, Superman, where are you now? When everything's gone wrong somehow. These men of steel, these men of power, are losing control by the hour." That song was written in the 80s, 30 years ago. That song could be written today. Because someone is telling you, I can give you everything you want. I'm the man of steel, I'm the woman of steel. Follow me and I'll give you all your heart's desire. And these women of steel and these men of steel are losing control by the hour. As if to prove the point about how we're immersed and in love with a sense of confusion, in 2016, Oxford English Dictionary named it its word of the year, the word post-truth. That was the word of the year. Now the word of the year is a word that captures the sort of the ethos and the fascinations of the culture at that time. And what a post-truth culture is, the definition of post-truth is a culture or something, a person, who elevates feelings and preferences over facts and truth. Feelings and preferences matter more in every form of life. They matter more than facts and truth. That isn't to say that they just discount truth altogether. They're not saying there is no truth. What they're saying is, truth exists, but I don't care. It's a very different thing. Truth exists, but I don't care. And it's leading to a sense of chaos. It really quite is. I want you to think about this now. When you look at culturally speaking, we're not talking about truth anymore. We're talking about tribalism. My side wins. So if you're on the right, the left is always telling lies. If you're on the left, the right is always telling lies. If you're a centrist, the right and the left are always telling lies. We're engaging in what I'm calling the Hitlerization of social commentary, where you have to agree with me more than I agree with me. My colleague Michael Ramsden points this out. You have to agree with me more than I agree with me. And if you don't, you're Hitler or Stalin or pick your despot, that's who you are. Truth isn't what's important anymore. We don't use facts and argument and reason any longer to settle our debates. We use labels and power to settle things. Because truth is subordinate to preferences and feelings. How have we gotten here? What is this? What's arisen from all of this? Where did it all come from? Well, you know, I think it was Os Guinness who said that you can always judge the health of a culture by the way it interacts with its chief virtues or its establishing virtues. When you look at the West, what is the establishing virtue of the West? It's freedom. And we think that freedom means the ability to do whatever you want, in whatever way you want. That is not what freedom actually is. We used to talk about freedom all the time, and we're no longer talking about freedom. Now we're talking about autonomy. And they're different things. They might sound synonymous. They are not the same thing. Autonomy comes from two Greek words. Autos meaning self and nomos meaning law. So when you are autonomous, you are a law unto yourself. In other words, your preferences matter more than facts. So here's the problem. That sounds liberating, but it's actually enslaving. Because here's the problem. If my preferences matter more than the truth, and your preferences matter more than the truth, and we're both autonomous, I'm a law unto myself, and you're a law unto yourself, and truth is no longer the thing that decides between us. When my preferences and your preferences clash, who will be the one who decides between us? It won't be truth. It'll be power. The one with the most microphones, the one with the loudest guns. And that will lead to an enslavement. It will lead to a very serious problem. See, we've sacrificed truth and clarity on the altar of our human autonomy. We have been autonomy seekers since the beginning of the race. The Bible actually describes this. When you look at Adam and Eve, they had the truth. The truth was they were meant to be with God. That's why the Genesis actually says they walked and talked with God in the cool of the day. They were supposed to be with God. That was their purpose. But Satan comes along. He shreds God's word a little bit. They shred it back a little bit. They don't quite quote him back accurately. Now Satan knows he's got them. And suddenly that fruit that never tempted them before suddenly becomes desirous because Satan says that if you eat of this fruit, you will be like God. You see what happened there? The truth was they were meant to be with God. Their preference was to be God. And their preferences mattered more than the truth. We are inherently autonomy-seeking individuals, and that always leads to some form of enslavement. Yuval Harari, in his book *Sapiens*, which is a runaway bestseller, describes the human condition, and he describes from, if you ascribe to these kind of things, he talks about the evolution of human psychology. This is what he says. Listen to what he says. 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was still an insignificant animal minding its own business in a corner of Africa. In the following millennia, it transformed itself into the master of the entire planet and the terror of the ecosystem. Today, it stands on the verge of becoming a god, poised to acquire not only eternal youth, but also the divine abilities of creation and destruction. This is the important part now. He says we are more powerful than ever before, but have very little idea what to do with all that power. We're still, humans seem to be more irresponsible than ever before. Self-made gods with only the laws of physics to keep us company. We are accountable to no one. We are accountable to no one. Is there anything more dangerous than irresponsible gods who don't know what they want? Is there anything more dangerous than irresponsible gods who don't know what they want? Why this is important, friends, is because we thought that the more enlightened we get, the more educated we become, somehow we would magically become civil to each other. We talk about the civil public square, where different ideas and people can come together on the basis of coming to a common ground and the desire for truth. And that would become a civil public square where we can engage in ideas. But if you look at the news today, and no one in this room needs to be reminded of this, short of just opening up your device and looking on the news today, and any particular news story, and you'll find out quickly, it is no longer the civic public square we are in the Roman Colosseum where the gladiators fight. Because truth is no longer important. We just want our champions to win. This has led to serious losses, I think, as human beings. You know, when you look at it, why this has happened, and it started with Adam and Eve, of course, but then you look at some of the great philosophers in the past centuries, and you look at Protagoras, the Greek, and he says, man is the measure of all things. Man is the measure of all things. There are no gods above us of any kind to dictate to us morality. We are the measure of all things. Now, if we're the measure of all things, then we become the definer of all things. And what we say goes. Everything's a matter of human opinion. We thought we had grown up out of that through the Enlightenment and empiricism and all these various things. Then you read the words of someone like Tom Flynn. He's a secular humanist. Listen to what he says. Secular humanism maintains that through a process of value inquiry informed by scientific and reflective thought, men and women can reach rough agreement concerning values, crafting ethical systems that apply across a broad range of circumstances. Through a process of value inquiry informed by scientific and reflective thought, men and women can reach rough agreement concerning values and ethical systems. So here's the question. Have we come to this rough agreement? Have we seen it? If you look at the Middle East, Ask people who are suffering from the violence there just how rough the agreement actually is. Ask someone who's been on the sharp end of racism just how rough that agreement actually is. Ask a woman who's been the victim of misogyny and ask her just how rough that ethical agreement actually is, despite all of our genius and all of our wonderful gadgetry and the things we do with ourselves in terms of our technological advances. You look at the universities, and people are, have lightning rod sort of issues, and you can't even speak necessarily. This is an exception. Without having some form of protest or some kind of violence happening or something happening where it's just trying to shut it down now. There was a professor, Charles Murray, who's no relation, by the way, but Charles Murray was speaking at Middlebury College, and the reaction to his speech was so violent that he had to speak in a room, but a camera was pointing at him because the audience couldn't be in the same room with him. Yet he and another professor, Alison Stenger, I believe it was, were violently attacked. She doesn't agree with him, but she was attacked because of her proximity to him. Because truth wasn't what's important. Preferences mattered more. And so he was attacked and she was attacked. And so I think about this statement that Tom Flynn says, that we can reach rough agreement concerning values. The reality is, we've just agreed to be rough. That's our real agreement. Because we're autonomous, we're autonomy seeking. What happens as a result of this? There are numerous consequences that come from a culture of confusion that values autonomy and preferences more than truth. The first thing to go is that sense of wisdom and reason, when our preferences matter more. I remember I was giving my testimony about how I became a Christian from a Muslim background, and there was a large group of people. It was a men's breakfast, actually, and there was a guy sitting in the front row, and he was taking furious notes. Not furious in terms of his tone, just like in terms of how fast his notes were going. I was like seeing the smoke coming from the pages. I'm like, where's the fire extinguisher for this guy? Well, usually that's one of the first people to come talk to you after you're done giving the talk. And he was. He said, I appreciated the way you didn't disagree with Islam when you were giving your talk. And the reason why he said that was because when I talk about my conversion, I talk about why I became a Christian, not why I left Islam. I became a Christian because the gospel is true. By implication, everything else is false. That's what I was highlighting. I said, well, you missed the point a little bit. And he said, well, let me show you something. And he had a diagram with a big capital T in the middle of it. He said, this represents the total truth. There is an objective total truth out there. I said, I agree with you. He says, we don't know all of it. Not all of us know the whole truth. I said, I also agree with you on that one, because if I knew everything, I'd be God. I don't know everything, because I'm not God. So far, we're in agreement. I'm not God. Let's keep going. He said, but all of us, and he had these little lowercase t's that were surrounding the big capital T. He said, all of us have versions of the truth, but they're incomplete. I said, all of us? He said, yeah, all of us. I said, really? Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, Idi Amin, I can keep going. And he said, well, I can tell you this. I don't prefer their versions of the truth, but because mine is incomplete, I can't disagree with them. Hitler? Seriously? He said, that's right. I said, so wait a minute, are you telling me that you can't disagree with anybody? He said, that's right. I said, sure you can. He said, no, I can't. I said, you just did it. I was a trial lawyer. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is a very well-read man, very intelligent, by the way, and very well-meaning. But his preference was that we all get along. And we don't do the hard work of finding out what our differences are. We can disagree without being disagreeable. He didn't want to do that hard work. He just wanted to all get along. And he realized that he had sacrificed his wisdom on the altar of his preferences. So the first thing to go is our sense of reason and our sense of wisdom. The second thing to go is our sense of human value. And I want to dwell on this for just a moment, because this is very, very serious. If there are no gods above us, if man is the measure of all things, and if there is no God above us to give us all value and to dictate in moral sense, then everything's a matter of opinion. And if we've seen anything in the past of human history, human opinion is a terrible, terrible measuring stick for human value. And despite all of our genius, we're still doing it today. I mean, we give our smartphones names. We say, hey, and if I say it, your smartphone will start to search something. We call them names, Alexa or Siri, whatever it might be. And what do we do with these smartphones? These little Their phones, their computers, but they make phone calls once in a while. What do we do with these things? We watch pornography. We engage in cyberbullying. We do all these things. We humanize these computers, and we use them to objectify human beings. And we think we're autonomous. Somehow, we've become completely autonomous here. We've lost a sense of human value. We no longer value each other. We value our preferences. We value our autonomy more than anyone else. And people are now just getting in our way. We will bulldoze them. The truth has serious consequences when it's forsaken. Very serious consequences. Reason and value, among many others. Is there a way out of this mess? Is there a way out? And I think that there is. I think there's a way out to find freedom, not autonomy. I think that's where truth leads us. Preferences leads to autonomy. Autonomy leads to chaos. Truth leads to freedom. And freedom leads to purpose, to who you really are. See, the Bible, the culture wants to reject the Bible as a source of freedom because it's an old, dusty book that has all these arbitrary rules that applied thousands and thousands of years ago to limit people's freedom, but now we don't need it because we're the determiner of all things. We are, after all, according to Yuval Harari, gods in our own mind. This is a misunderstanding of what the Bible's about. The Bible is not an anti-freedom book. It is an anti-autonomy book because autonomy leads to enslavement. Because it's a pro-freedom book, and the message of the gospel and the person of Christ is pro-freedom, I think we can find our freedom there. What does that mean? How do I distinguish between autonomy and freedom? If autonomy is the ability to do whatever you want, whenever you want, that's the ability to be the law unto yourself, and that leads to chaos. Well, what is freedom? Freedom is the ability to do what you want, but bounded by the moral law, what you should. What you want and what you should have to be intertwined together. Freedom, therefore, has limits. It's based on truth. It's based on the moral truths, especially. It always has limits. I'll give you an example of this. When we were buying a house, my wife and I, we have 3 great kids, but when we were buying the house we currently live in, it was only my son, my oldest. He was about 8 or 10 months old, and we went looking at this house, and it had this wonderfully big backyard. But the problem is that it backed up to a main road, so there are cars and trucks whizzing by all the time. And I thought to myself, well, the kids can't play back here because kids being kids, the ball will bounce into the street and the kids will get pulverized and they're not going to look both ways. But when we set up a boundary, you can't play beyond here, that allowed them to enjoy the purpose of the backyard. They had the freedom to enjoy the backyard because otherwise they couldn't have the freedom because it was too dangerous. But the boundary we set up, not too much, just enough, to give them the freedom to enjoy the backyard, and the purpose of the backyard was so that they could enjoy it. Freedom and purpose go hand in hand, and they need boundaries. Chesterton even pointed it out when he said that even art has limitations. The essence of every picture is the frame, he said. You may think in your own creative way that you are free to draw a giraffe with a short neck, only to find out you are not free to draw a giraffe at all. You may try to free a tiger from his bars, but you dare not free a tiger from his stripes. You may try to free a camel of his humps, only to find out you have freedom from being a camel at all. Everything in the world of facts has limits, and there's limits to that fact. Bring this to a close, because the opening act's almost over, and the main course is over. Jesus actually points this out, as he is the source of truth. Before I condemn a post-truth culture, by the way, that values preferences over freedom, I can tell you this. I was part of that. I valued truth, but only if it suited me. As a Muslim, I thought Islam was true, but I was confronted with the truth of the gospel. And the evidence began to mount and mount and mount and mount. I found the answers I needed within 2 to 3 years. Just 2 to 3 short years. But it took me 6 to 7 more years to the commitment to Christ, because it wasn't that the answers were hard to find. The answers were hard to accept, because it required change on my part. And my preferences were to stay being a Muslim. But the truth eventually won out. What is that truth? Jesus himself. Listen to the words Jesus said in John chapter 8, verses 31 to 36. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Did you see what he said? Truth sets you free. The culture says preferences gives you autonomy. Jesus says truth sets you free. Truth and freedom are linked. Their response to him is nothing short of hilarious. They respond to him and they say, "We are children of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it you say we'll become free?" That's hysterical because they're saying that having forgotten that they were enslaved to Egypt for 400 years. And they were saying this while under Roman occupation. Preferences matter more than facts, and it distorts your view of reality. But Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. The Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed." Did you catch the coupling? Truth will set you free. The Son will set you free. The Son is the truth. Personally, it seems to personally be the truth. You can't just say that. You have to back it up with something. And I've done many, many debates. You can see them on YouTube if you'd like, on the excellent evidence there is for the resurrection of Jesus, not as a matter of hope only, but as a matter of history, not a matter of fiction or fantasy, but as a matter of fact. He rose from the dead. Why is that important? The reason that's important, friends, is because he tells you who you are. He says, you and I are created in God's image. We were at Yale University, and a young man came up to the microphone and said, "I see how truth leads to freedom. But can you tell me how Jesus leads to this freedom?" He said, "The Son sets you free. How does that work?" And the answer is quite simple. He will often ask me, "Why do you think Jesus, more than Muhammad or Buddha or Krishna or Confucius, why not those men?" My answer is simply this. Jesus died and rose from the dead. And a guy who rises from the dead has credibility. What does he say? He says, "I am made in God's image." That is a uniquely and specifically Judeo-Christian thing. Now, if he died and stayed dead, I would have no reason to believe him. But if he died and rose again, I have every reason to believe only him. You are not the flotsam and jetsam of the universe. You are not cosmic pollution, as Lawrence Krauss would call you. You are made in God's image. That image was marred and destroyed by our desire for autonomy. But Jesus has come to say, "I can pay your debt because I have no debts of my own to pay." And he died on the cross, claiming to pay the debts, and he rose from the dead to prove he was right. That tells me who I am. It tells me who you are. Freedom is the ability to do what you want based on the objective truths of what you should in accordance with what you are. That's why you are free indeed. Not just free, free indeed. Desire, morality, purpose, all get wrapped up with who you and I are. Nothing else gives that to you. Nothing else gives that to you. Not in the smartphone age, not in an information age, not in a rampant freedom age. It is freedom to be understood. 2 quotes and then I'm done. It was Thomas Bracken who wrote a poem called Not Understood. One of the reasons why we have this anger and why truth is no longer the important thing anymore, we're not interested in truth, we're interested in being understood. And so if we're not understood, we get angry with each other, and there's this tearing we have at each other all the time. Maybe even at God, because we think he doesn't understand, or there is none to understand us. Thomas Bracken wrote that poem, and he says, "Not understood, we move along asunder. Our paths grow wider as the seasons creep. Along with the years we marvel and we wonder why life is life, and then we fall asleep. Not understood. Not understood how many cheerless hearts are breaking for lack of sympathy. Ah, day by day, how many lonely hearts are aching. How many noble spirits pass away, not understood. Oh God," he says, "that men would see a little clearer, or at least judge less harshly when they cannot see. Oh God, that men would draw a little nearer to one another. They would draw nearer thee and be understood." When you draw near to God, the one who creates you with a purpose, creates this universe with a purpose, creates you with a purpose. You know that you are made in his image because he's saved you and he's sealed that salvation with his resurrection. That's when you're truly understood. Jesus said he was the way, the truth, and the life. And for 2,000 years, we've been trying to fill the holes in our lives with things that subordinate truth to personal preferences. But think about the things you put your faith in. Things that are neither true nor personal. How ironic is it that our personal preferences matter more than truth, but the things we put our faith in, whether it's smartphones or experiences or our careers or other people, are neither true nor personal themselves. It was the Canadian band Crash Parallel who wrote a song called Rain Delays that so depicted it. This is a secular band, and they point out the human problem when truth is jettisoned, when all we want to do is seek out self-seeking things, when our autonomy takes over. This is what they say: sleepless nights and endless days, and mini skirts and serving trays, selling sex for pocket change, waking up from rain delays, living off the alcohol with no one but a cab to call, lost inside a bathroom stall with carbon copy life withdrawal. And driving cars we can't afford, living off our own accord, making sure we're never bored, between coffee grinds and corner stores, limousines and cigarettes, and chasing dreams with fishing nets, long weekends without regrets, when no one here is taking bets. I need someone to believe in, someone to fill this space with grace, someone to look into my eyes and touch my face, someone to make me strong, someone to make me belong, someone to make me alive. Not something, not some experience, not even my preferences. I need someone to make me alive. That is the gospel. Jesus said, and I'll be done. He's the truth. In a world that seeks to elevate personal preferences over truth, I think we can offer something of hope, because in Jesus, the truth is a person. Thank you so much. Let's hear from God.